morning, everybody.
Good
Okay,
morning.
is everybody out there ready?
Yeah.
I don't hear anybody. Are you ready, Sarah?
I think they're saying yes.
Okay, she's saying yes.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so here we go. One, two, three. There you go. Good morning, everybody. And let me get my mic set up so you can hear me. How's that? My producer, is that okay? I'm getting a thumbs up. So, good morning, everybody. And just to let you know, the name of that song is Sweet Sue. And that song was written in 1928 by Victor Young, and the lyrics were by Will Harris. Now, that I consider a jazz standard. As a matter of fact, it is a jazz standard. And people like uh, Benny Goodman recorded it, Bing Crosby, the Miles Brothers. And guess what, you jazz aficionados? Miles Davis recorded it in 1956. So it's a well-known song, and there's never a week that goes by that I don't include it in one of my sets of music. So that's our opening. And where do you go on the internet or on television to hear an interview and the host comes on and plays a song that's about 50 or 100 years old to give you a little cultural enrichment? I'll tell you where you go. You come right here to Life After Scientology, and I'm your host, Ron Miscavige. Now, before we get started, let me put my horn away. Okay, so now this morning we have a special guest back, and we've had her on. Her name is Sarah Landry, and she escaped from the Nithyananda Cult some years ago, and we've had two shows on priorly. So this is part three, and what we want to get into today, I think it's going to be very educational, is the similarity between Scientology and the Nithyananda Cult. So without any further words from me, except one thing, and I would love you to do this. If all of you who are watching could please share this today, I'd really appreciate it. I really want to get more subscribers and more people getting educated by our programs, because this is a valuable education. It doesn't take you long to get it, maybe a half an hour to an hour. And in that amount of time, you can proof yourself up to maybe not get conned into going into one of these cults, save you a lot of time, a lot of money, and maybe even save you from being disconnected from your family. And on the other hand, if you'd like to participate in it, the simple way for you to do it is to become a patron. And if you go to my website, therealronmiscavige.com, you can contribute $1 or $2 or $5 or $100 a month, whatever is within your budget and whatever you feel you'd like to do. And I welcome your support. It does definitely help the ongoingness of this program. So now we got started a little late today, so I'm going to stop talking about business and just have Sarah take over. Sarah, good morning, and please let's get rolling, because I'm really anxious for our audience to get this information. So
Yeah, me too.
let me just I don't need these for the close up, the rating. Um, the first thing I want to take up is this, and we went over this. Obviously, I just don't come on here and start talking to somebody. We spend a considerable amount of time ahead of time working out the bullet points and the things we like to bring up. And one of the things, the number one on the list, they punish their disciples through forced labor and isolation in branch campuses in India.
Yeah.
And this is similar to the RPF, but it's not called the RPF. Why don't we start off with that, Sarah, okay?
Yes, absolutely. So this is an interesting thing because somebody commented on our first video saying that maybe the Nithyananda cult is a little bit less abusive or not quite as bad as Scientology because we don't have an equivalent to RPF. But it's just because we didn't get into it in that interview. In Nithyananda's cult, if somebody says something that he finds unacceptable, or if he gives somebody an impossible task and they can't complete it because it's, impossible, they're put into something that's called prayaschita. And when someone goes into prayaschita, for example, if it's a monastic disciple, like a woman who would normally dress in a sari every day, which is mandatory, or a man who wears the saffron robes called it in the form of a dhoti, which is like the traditional Hindu male dress. When they go into prayaschita, the first thing that distinguishes them from everyone else is that they have to put on an outfit that looks something like a jail outfit. It's a more faded color of orange. It's a shirt and kind of pajama pants, and they're sent away from the main part of the campus called the Audinum, usually to a place called Sacred Arts, which is, you know, it's across the jungle, really, from where the regular campus is. And to put it into perspective, like we were told never to walk there at night because black panthers are in the area, lots of dangerous wild animals, lots of snakes. And once they're in Prayaschita, their workload goes from the intellectual work done in the main campus into complete manual labor. So while the main campus that has about 300 people living in it, whereas their workload is mostly about transcribing discourses to make into books, um, preparing for program participants when people come for the paid programs, or preparing the stage show for the daily discourses. In the Sacred Arts campus, where the people in Prayaschita have to live, the main work has to do with building the compound walls around the ever-growing campus, because they're constantly buying the land that's adjacent to the ashrams. So that means the big, huge stone wall with barbed wire around the top is constantly shifting. And it's the people being punished who have to keep rebuilding that wall. And it's backbreaking manual labor. Like it includes huge stone slabs and huge poured concrete slabs. And the ashram dump is also there, so it's not uncommon to hear that there's a giant garbage fire that they have to work to put out, and there's no firefighters around, so it's people, carrying buckets of water who have to put out these little fires. And they work 18 to 20-hour days. And during the 4 hours that you'd think would be like their sleep time, that's when they're expected to do yoga, catch up on the discourse, because they're not allowed to come to the main campus to watch the daily discourse with everyone else. They're really in solitary confinement out in Sacred Arts. So they're not allowed to speak to people in the main campus. They can only speak to each other. The only time we would see them is if one of them was put on food service duty, so they would have to walk to the kitchen, collect the huge pots of steaming hot food. And this is in like 40 degrees Celsius. I think that's like 110 degrees Fahrenheit. They'd have to carry these huge metal pots of food and the coffee and the tea to the welcome center and to the rest of us.
Yeah,
So
I'll tell you something. It sounds like the RPF.
yeah,
It is like the RPF. It isn't similar. It is the RPF.
it is.
And
Yeah, yeah. The only difference is instead of wearing black, they wear kind of a faded orange color.
yeah,
And
I guess that would be the main difference. But
yeah,
you're forced to do manual labor. Well, maybe one thing on your sleep time, you are allowed to sleep, so maybe that might be a little bit tougher in the Nithyananda if
yeah.
they're expected to do yoga. Well, but I mean, is that mostly meditating? Is that what they do?
No, the yoga is, there's two different types of yoga. There's a yoga called Nithyananda Yoga, which is 1 hour of yogic postures.
Okay.
And then there's something called a Kata, which is bodybuilding. And for a Kata, that includes everything from weightlifting to running laps. Like it's a fairly intensive workout regime. And what made it the hardest is that uh, whenever you go to a personal trainer to work out, at least in my experience, they usually recommend that um, you do some kind of protein loading, but these people were on a very low protein, high carb diet,
Wow.
and it wasn't nutritionally balanced. Like it's the diet there consists predominantly of white rice, and the only diversity they'd get in vegetables would be maybe a few times a week they might have some runny spinach in the soup that's served with that white rice. It's very it's extremely unhealthy
Well, I
the
can
way
see
they're
that.
fed.
Yeah. And if you're not getting rest, your body never has a chance to rebuild itself either.
Exactly. Exactly. And I mean, when these people would be seen by outsiders, like paid program participants, they would ask, "Is that person sick? What's wrong with that person? Why didn't they get dressed this morning? Why are they
Wow.
wearing pajamas?" And it was really hard to explain to people what prayaschita means because, of course, at the time, we are never told those people are being sent to a labor camp or they're being punished. We were told that they're doing a spiritual process to bring themselves back to the state of completion. And so
Yeah.
the kind of cult lingo that's used is that prayaschita, it's not a punishment, it's a person's time to break their laziness pattern through intensive work and break their resistance to the guru by being isolated in a place where they have nobody but their own thoughts, but their own self to listen to. So it's not something that they are told is a punishment. And the worst thing about it is a lot of those people, they don't realize how badly abused they are. They'll be the first to defend this whole prayaschita practice
Wow.
because they believe at the end of it, and I mean, some of them have been in this for years, for like years, in silence too, like vows of silence. If they speak, they get beaten.
Jesus. I'll tell you.
Mhm.
Well, I'm a bit astonished, but I'm telling you, it is very similar to the RPF. It might be a little bit more cruel than the RPF, although
Yeah.
as far as length of time, as you were just talking about, I knew of one guy, and I'm not going to mention his name because I don't want him to get in trouble. I think he
Yeah.
was on the RPF about 9 or 10 years, which is absolutely ludicrous.
Yeah.
Originally, the RPF was started on the ship Apollo, and it was going to be a couple months. I mean, if you were screwing up on your job or something, you do this and get straightened out, and a couple months later, you're back on post.
Yeah.
It is not that these days. It
No.
is done to break somebody. It isn't
Yes.
done to help them. You're trying to break them, and it just seems like the Nithyananda is trying to break the people and make them
Yeah.
complete subservient to any orders or anything they're told to do. Was that your take on it too, or no?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. And like for example, my position in that organization was following up on everyone to make sure that they do social media posts every day. And there was a time once during a program called Mahasadashivoham, one of these $15,000 December programs. During the morning yoga, I was in the hall with the participants helping them with their postures. Nithyananda did a walk through the hall and he kind of snapped his fingers and motioned for me to follow him. So I followed him out of the hall to kind of the adjoining dining area. And he started growling and yelling at me, saying, why the hell have you let Adinavasis, which is the name for people, residents there, why have you let them, um, you know, slide behind on their video uploads? Why isn't everybody doing 3 videos a day? Why aren't you recruiting for the next program? Like in the middle of one program, we are expected to simultaneously recruit participants into the next program. And see, like everyone is sleep deprived at that point in time because the program itself is structured in a way that participants are deprived of sleep. So an average day in one of these 31-day programs, month-long programs, an average day is 20 hours of packed activity, including yoga, discourses, sort of psychological partner activities, lunch breaks. Um, and we're expected to be there with them throughout that entire 20 hours. Then they're bussed off to hotels where they sleep for, 3 or 4 hours. During the time that they're sleeping, the Adi Navasis have to clean the hall, set the chairs for the next day, wash the dishes, do all the grunt work.
Hmm.
So people were 20 hours a day active, plus cleaning, not sleeping. We barely had time to run back to our rooms to shower and change before
Wow.
the next day started.
And
So
wait, what does something like that cost a participant?
15,000 US dollars.
Good Lord.
Yeah, 15 grand to get brainwashed and abused is.
Wow.
Um, so he was yelling at me, and it was a strange scene because he yells at people all the time. He has a very short fuse and a major anger problem, so it wasn't a shock for me to get yelled at. But it's rare for him to yell at people in front of outsiders, in front of program participants. And some of them were coming late to yoga and then stopping and kind of freezing because they've only seen him in his discourses on stage where he has a big plastered fake smile and he moves his hands really gracefully and talks really enticingly. And here they see him screaming at me, telling me that I'm a failure because people aren't doing their 3 YouTube videos a day, and asking why don't I have my cell phone out while I'm in the hall following up with the kitchen team and the temple team and the construction team to make sure that they're doing their videos. So we're supposed to multitask with huge responsibilities under no sleep
Yeah.
all the time. And I mean, it was a sad scene. I was on the ground groveling at his feet, literally. Like I knelt down at his feet and was begging him, to give me another chance. And he said, I'm not even going to send you to Sacred Arts. I'll send you to a branch campus.
Wow.
And the branch campuses are a step further away than the Prajachita camp of Sacred Arts. And they are known as the most dangerous place that he can put somebody because these are lands in South India that have been donated to him, but with kind of incomplete paperwork. So, for example, in India, a family property could be inherited among 5 or 6 different siblings, and each sibling has an equal share to that land. So, there are lands that have been donated to him by one of a group of siblings,
I got
and
it.
then the sibling who donates the land deed to Nithyananda gets taken to court by the other siblings who have an equal say in that. And so it leads to sometimes violent encounters where they consider the ashram as having done what they call a land grab. And so he'll send people in Prajachita to go to those lands and basically stake them out and hold them because in India, if somebody is on that land physically with the deed in hand, nobody else can take it away. But if the land is left vacant, people can invade it and kind of lay a claim to it. And so in these branch campuses, people have been, stoned by the locals and beaten by the locals and locked in buildings and set on fire by the locals. So when he said he wanted to send me to a branch campus, like I was terrified.
Wow.
And a lot of people could say like, well, why wouldn't you just leave? Why wouldn't you run away? But the whole thing it's a gated compound with security guards, and you can't leave that gate unless you have approval to go.
Right. I
And so,
mean, you have security guards the way they have it at the international base for Scientology in Hemet, California, right?
exactly,
So
yeah.
what would these people do? Would they seize you physically and just prevent you from leaving?
They wouldn't open the gate. The gate is locked with like it's a huge metal double door that's padlocked at the middle.
I
And
got it.
if you have approval and they let you leave, they'll unlock it and they'll open the gate. But if you don't have approval, they won't unlock and open it. So you're physically kept inside like a prisoner.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you this: we're talking similarities that are unbelievable here. But the thing is, I guess if you come right down to it, if you were to check out all the cults, I will bet you there are common denominators in all of these that each one of them uphold in order to keep a person in this state of mind. And to get a
Yes.
person in this state of mind, I'm sure many of them do similar things. Like with Nithyananda, as we went over earlier, the first course or whatever you do is free. That's kind of to get your mindset. Hey, this is pretty damn good. And then the next course is not very expensive, but then as the courses go on, these get very expensive.
Yeah.
And then the other point we made is the more money disciples pay, the greater their blessings and privileges
Yeah.
in the cult. Why don't you go into that just a bit? Because, like
Sure.
in Scientology, if you're a big donator to the IAS, the International Association of Scientologists, you can get away with a lot of things. As a matter of fact, if you get in ethics trouble, one of the things, in other words, you did something bad that you have to kind of change your ways, you have to do what's called conditions. But as part of that, these days, they expect you to donate money to one of the building funds or the IAS as part of getting out of that particular ethics condition. And with Nyanda, the more money you pay, you get more blessings. Why don't you go into that a little bit and tell us about that, please?
Sure. So, I mean, if somebody pays 15 grand for a December program, that's not the only expense that they have for that month. Um, every day there's a puja, which is like a worship ceremony to Nithyananda. And that costs $1,000 USD if somebody wants to participate in that puja. And, throughout the program, they also offer what are called homas. And these are temple ceremonies where a deity is invoked in the form of fire, and offerings are made to that deity, usually fruits or fabrics or incense. And, that can cost between $500 to $2,000 to participate in a homa. And there's a high pressure on people each day in the program to pay for these, to sponsor these, and to do them. And, you're promised, a person is promised before going to this program that it's going to give them perfect health, perfect wealth, perfect family relationships. And yet, it's kind of, they get blindsided by these homas and pujas, because before these, the temple priest or one of the program coordinators will tell everyone in the hall, this is the homa to do if you want a perfect marriage. This is the puja to do if you want to attract wealth. And so once they're there and they're a captive audience, it's kind of like the promise of what the program itself would deliver gets reduced. And if they want these added blessings, they have to pay for these extra features. And that's just a small faction. The bigger thing is there's a program that they call Sarvagnyapita. And roughly translated from Sanskrit to English, that means the seat of knowledge on planet Earth. And if they want to be a member of Sarvagnyapita, they have to pay $200,000 USD. And once they've paid for that, it gets them front row seats at all the programs, priority rooms within the ashram if they ever come as a volunteer or as a visitor. And they're told that it's only if they pay this 200 grand into Sarvagnyapita that they're guaranteed a place in Kailasa, which is the abode of Lord Shiva. And this has been added to, just this past year. They've created something that they call Kata, which are $1 million sponsors. And whoever donates $1 million is promised a golden statue of themselves in Nithyananda's temple that's going to be worshipped daily. So it's basically like they're paying money to become a deity. And it's interesting. I think I had mentioned this in our first interview, Ron, and I had messages from people afterwards who had paid this 200 grand or this $1 million. And they wanted me to mention another thing, that they're promised for the $200,000 donation that a gold leaf plaque will be installed in the temple that he's building with their name on it. And yet these gold leaf, this was never actually done. And so they're not even getting their $200,000 worth. They're not even getting the lowest promised benefit. It's not happening. And people have paid $1 million and they're still waiting to see their statues. So it's really a bait and switch. Like, he promises people these great incentives that never actually happen.
Now, I got a question. Now, for $1 million, like, are you guaranteed some type of higher spiritual awareness? Or like, I think we mentioned about being able to sit there with the blindfold on and read a piece of paper. Has anybody ever achieved any of these things? You were around for quite a few years. I know in Scientology, one of the earlier things, and I don't even think they're promoting it these days, is that you would be able to go exterior to your mortal body and view things at a distance. I didn't meet one person in over 40 years who ever achieved that. Did
Yeah.
anybody in Nithyananda ever achieve any supernatural powers that they were promised? Ever?
Yes. And this is where it gets a little bit problematic because um, a lot of people, myself included, have had glimpses of success with these powers. So, for example, for the blindfold reading, in the first Inner Awakening where this was offered to participants, May 2015, I was a paid participant there. And, we spent hours and hours and hours each day blindfolded, staring at pieces of paper that people had given us. And I did get to the point where I could successfully see in golden letters in my inner space the letters that were on the paper in front of me. But that wasn't something that I could replicate. You know what I mean? Like like say for example, I sat for an hour with the blindfold on and the paper in front of my face, and I would suddenly see like a golden flash of that word. That happened maybe once or twice out of 100 times sitting and practicing it. So I never had the confidence to do a stage demonstration. But some people did, and they did demonstrate on stage, and it made them lifelong true believers.
Yeah.
And it was especially successful for the kids. Most of the kids who sat with their paper, after just one or two tries, they could fluently read while blindfolded. And I mean, I got excited. I thought this was an incredible proof, not only of the power of the third eye, but also the power of Nithyananda himself, because we all attributed the awakening to him.
I got it.
But since then, a lot of my friends who have left, I've been doing a lot of research into different groups that also teach this same third eye power. And neuroscientists have a word for it. They call it midbrain activity. And when somebody really forces and strains and practices closing their eyes and putting on a blindfold and staring at a piece of paper, they found that the other human senses will take over and be able to retrieve the data on that piece of paper. It's something that's being extensively studied right now. And similarly, even the US government has done tests into remote viewing to great success. And so one of the powers I would demonstrate back when I was with the Nithyananda cult was the power of remote vision. I could sit with somebody and close my eyes and kind of get a vision of their house or the school they went to as a child and describe it in great detail, quite accurately.
Well, that's something that I've never heard it happen in Scientology. But I can tell you, I mean, there's not a great amount of money you can make by sitting with a blindfold on and reading a piece of paper. I mean,
Exactly.
I mean, what you're paying for it, you're paying 200 grand or $1 million. You know, well, it's a con as far as I'm concerned.
It's a con. It is a con. And the other thing is it's not a power that everyone has manifested. So there are people who have paid 200,000 or $1 million, and they haven't even had the glimpses of these powers like I've had or like some of the kids have had.
Yeah.
And the thing that came as the biggest shock and disappointment for me was when those two kids in Toronto told me that all of the kids had resorted to cheating because they were expected to be like a stage show demonstrating these powers every day for visitors to the ashram and for paid program participants. And like me, they'd had a couple of glimpses of success with the power, but it wasn't consistent.
Yeah.
So they realized that when the blindfold was on, if they raised their eyebrows up, they could kind of create a little gap right here and see down to the paper. So it was kind of comical after I figured that out, after they told me, because then looking back at the demonstrations, most of them are tilting their heads up and holding the papers down here while they read. Well, now I know why. That was the only way they could peek. So
Wow.
it's a funny kind of a psychic phenomenon where, what I feel is happening, and this is just my personal take, but what I feel is happening is that there are certain people who naturally have a talent for psychic ability. Like you've got a beautiful musical gift, and some people are artistically talented with painting, and some people are mathematical geniuses. I think there are a certain number of people who have psychic ability that they're born with. They have this intuition. And this is being exploited by Nithyananda because a lot of these people don't know that they have a psychic ability because they've never tried it before.
Yeah.
They've never tested it. So he touches everyone's third eye and says, okay, now I've initiated you. Go sit for 5 hours with the blindfold on and stare at a paper.
Oh, is that what he does? He touches you?
Yes. Yep. He'll usually with his thumb on the third eye. And that's called energy darshan.
I got it.
And so he'll touch somebody. Or he's even started giving online darshans because now, of course, he's hiding out in South America, fleeing from a rape charge. So now he says his power has expanded to the point where he doesn't need to give somebody a physical touch. They can just gaze at his picture, gaze at his third eye through a computer screen, and the initiation is transferred. But in any case, he gives an initiation. Then he sends people to practice all night long with a partner. And what I feel is happening is that those who are naturally gifted with this kind of psychic ability, they have their first psychic experience that they would have just as easily had if they had gone to a science lab and sat down and been told to do this, or, to another school or to another temple. But because he tells people it's his initiation that's awakened it, the moment somebody has one of these experiences, they automatically think it's a gift from him.
They'll attribute it to him.
Yeah, they attribute it to him. And then it confirms his lie, which is that he is the living incarnation of Sadashiva, and that he is the ultimate avatar, and that he's the only guru on the planet who can give these powers. And the other interesting thing, Ron, is that true Hindu scriptures, especially there's a scripture called the Yoga Sutra by Patanjali, a great incarnation, a great saint in India's history. He says that on a seeker's path to enlightenment, the greatest obstacle and the biggest setback, the worst diversion, is chasing after mystical powers. And he describes that the excitement for powers and the ego that comes from it once a power is achieved will keep a person away from realizing the ultimate, which is the manifestation of pure compassion and pure love, because these powers are ego boosting. And it's just ironic that Nithyananda claims that these powers are a side effect of enlightenment, whereas every Hindu scripture you look into about these cautions people to avoid these powers at all costs.
This is really enlightening. It's enlightening to me. I can see that you if you have true compassion for your fellow man, and love people in spite of the way they are, I don't know if that might be the greatest achievement that you could have.
Absolutely. I believe it is, because that compassion is healing and transforming. And arrogance and ego and feeling of superiority, nobody is ever, even if you have the capacity to bless somebody or to give them a boon, who's going to want to ask you if they feel judged and if they feel condescended to? And what I see happening in so many people who are Nithyananda's followers is that they become extremely arrogant and extremely condescending. And there's a major us against them polarity that's developed in these people because they're told, it's almost like in Harry Potter, how the magical people are special and everyone else is a muggle. And you should avoid them because they're nothing. They're non-entities to you. They don't matter.
Let me tell you something. What you're saying is a trait that many Scientologists have. They become arrogant and condescending, and they look at people who have not come into their cult as raw meat. In other words, people who aren't really enlightened as to the true data about life you can get from L. Ron Hubbard. They are arrogant. What you're describing is a Scientology, especially a person who's been in Scientology for years and years. That is a trait that they have.
Well, and it doesn't surprise me. Like I remember with Nithyananda, he told all of us that that we had an ashramite meeting once, and he was yelling and screaming at everyone in the hall, saying, "Some of you have been late for yoga, and how many of you were there for yoga on time at 4 a.m.? You were there early." And a few of us raised our hands and we were looking around, whoever was on time, and he said, you fools, you idiots, don't you realize it's your responsibility to make everyone come on time? You're just as bad as the people who were late. He was berating us like this for hours.
Ah,
And one by one, he was going to people and saying, okay, I gave you the responsibility to create a database with all of my books available as free digital downloads. Why isn't it ready? And for example, this is like 500 books translated into 50 languages, and a person is given 10 hours to do it.
right.
So it's not physically possible. But that person will be blamed and ridiculed for not doing it. And at the end of this meeting, he was yelling at us saying, um, it's funny when you're at a program and you've paid thousands of dollars to be there. He tells you that the best thing you can do with your life, the highest achievement, is to live with him full time as an Adinavasi or as a sannyasi, somebody who's joined the monastic order, which is like his version of Sea Org.
Yeah.
Once you're in that monastic order, he kind of flips it on you and says, those who are able to be my outside devotees and maintain a job and have a family and have a household, these are the people who can take my teachings and integrate it. But you guys are like, he coined a term for it. He says factory recall. He claims that he is the source of all humanity, and that if you move there to live with him, you're one of the defective ones who has to be there with him so he can fix you.
Unreal. Unreal. This is.
Yeah, so we all feel like shit about ourselves because we're the factory recall ones. We're the ones who can't make it in the real world. And somehow this information had leaked out to outside devotees, and then they started feeling a superiority complex over the people living there as Adinavasis. So one of the funniest things I've ever seen was Nithyananda on stage, and there was a major program going on, and one of the participants had started yelling at one of the sannyasis. And it was truly an imitation of the way Nityananda himself yells at the sannyasi. Like, I forget what the person had said specifically, but yelling at someone for being late and being clumsy. And Nityananda, for the first time I've ever seen, he yelled at a program participant the way he would yell at the rest of us. And then he said, it's true that the Adinavasis are slow and they're late and they're buffaloes, they sleep all the time, but they're a million times better than any of the rest of you because they've made the dedication to me. They live for me, and that makes them better than everybody else. I'm clearing that up right now. So he does a real mind game on people where whatever you're doing, he tells you the other person is better.
Yeah.
But
In other words, you can't be right no matter what you do.
exactly,
You
you
can't
can't
be
be
right.
right no matter what you do. You're always struggling to catch up with his impossible expectations. And even if you fulfill his impossible expectations, then he extends his impossible expectations that you're now expected to make everyone else fulfill their responsibilities. And it's an increasing workload. And I remember another one of his so-called teachings is that in the outer world, the reward for a job well done is a raise or vacation time. But in his organization, the reward for a job well done is increased responsibility. It's like once you achieve something, he gives you an even greater task that you're expected to achieve next. And in that way, we're constantly kept so focused on the workload that he's giving us that we don't really have time to question him.
Wow. I'll tell you something. This is. He's a bad guy. I mean, I
He
say that.
is. Yeah.
He's a real bad guy. He's what we would call, or Scientologists would call, a suppressive person. I'd call him a sociopath. This guy
Yes.
is a definite
Yeah.
sociopath. Now, let's say if you were to leave and you got away, what
Yeah.
do they have a similar thing to fair game as they do in Scientology? I mean,
They
there's people that come on and give comments now, and I know that they're still drinking the Kool-Aid and they attack you on the program. I mean, I can see through it just the way I can see through various people who write bad comments about my shows. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a critical comment if it's aimed at maybe you doing something better, but just to condemn
Yeah.
somebody just for being who they are or what they're doing,
Yeah.
that's they're paid to do this. When they're paid to do it, they want to curry favor. And some
Yeah.
people like who are acting like Nithyananda, they wanted to curry favor with him. They wanted
Yeah.
him to say, look at him now. Oh, I really like you. It's such bullshit.
Exactly.
It's unbelievable to me. But
Yeah. Yeah. So in Nithyananda Sangha, they don't call it fair game. There's a Facebook group. It's a private group that only Nithyananda cult members can join, called Abusive Content Removal. And that's a group where his disciples are expected to check in every single day to get the list of people who are now excommunicated. And for example, anybody who has liked one of my Facebook posts calling out the organization, their names have been put on a list in that abusive content removal group. And Nityananda's brainwashed people have to spam them with messages saying, why did you like Sarah Landry's post? Don't you know that she's abusive? Don't you know she's anti-Hindu? Don't you know that she's molested people? Don't you know she tried to poison Nityananda? Don't you know she's a liar? Don't you know she's now trying to start her own cult of anti-cults? And so even my relatives, my high school friends, if they like anything I've posted, they get messages from Nityananda people saying you should unfriend her, you should block her, you shouldn't like what she's putting out there, it's lies. So that's one level. Besides that, instructions are given in this private group, abusive content removal, saying to flag a video, flag it as hate speech, flag it as inappropriate, flag it as abusive, flag it as bullying. And based on that, they try to get anything critical against Nityananda removed from the internet. And in the case of people who are extremely open about exposing Nityananda's flaws and his lies and his psychosis, I think he's psychotic, and he's also he's crazy. If you listen to him, especially his most recent discourses, he's definitely lost his mind, and he's going through kind of a public degeneration that would be funny if it wasn't so painful for so many people who he's dragging down with him. But those of us who are speaking out and really revealing insider secrets, he goes to a full-on character assassination. So in my case, they have created a YouTube channel that they call Cult Leader Sarah, where they're posting videos trying to break down. For example, they made a video about the way that I describe myself as being brainwashed by him. So they made like a collection video of different clips of things that I said about him back when I was still brainwashed in his cult, saying, does this sound like a brainwashed person? Why
right.
was she singing his praises just a year ago if now she's saying he's dangerous? And it's really stupid. Like, what they're doing is using a person's brainwashed statements to try to prove that they weren't brainwashed
Right.
when it happens later.
Well,
And
listen. That's the same thing as Scientology, because you write a success story after you
yeah,
do a particular auditing session or do a course. Then they'll bring these up and say, "Look at the success story he wrote." Yeah,
yeah,
that's right. When you're fucking brainwashed, that's how
yeah,
you think. That's proof that you
exactly.
were brainwashed. The success story itself. And now that you're
Yeah,
coming out and you've regained your senses,
yeah.
well, there you go. That's the story.
And another thing is that Nityananda blatantly lied to his disciples. And about a week after I made my video called Brainwashed by Nityananda, Now I'm Speaking Out, in his discourse, he lied and said brainwashing is not possible. It's been debunked by scientists. The US Court of Law doesn't accept brainwashing in a criminal court. And I did a little bit of research, and I think the most famous case where brainwashing absolutely was acceptable in the US court is the case of Patty Hearst.
Oh yeah.
And you might remember, like, she got kidnapped. She was a wealthy heiress to a quite a huge fortune. She was kidnapped by kind of guerrilla rebels against the economic system,
Right.
and she was tortured into, becoming one of them.
Yeah.
And so she started speaking out against her own family, and she robbed a bank at gunpoint and went to jail for it. But she was deprogrammed from the brainwashing while she was in prison. And since then, I think it was the last thing President Clinton did in office before he officially resigned after being impeached. The last thing he did was officially pardon her. And so it's on record that she acted under the influence of brainwashing.
Yeah.
And it's easy to feel sympathy for somebody like Patty Hearst, who was, violently kidnapped from her own home and tortured. It's harder to feel sorry for people who willingly go into the place where they get brainwashed.
Yeah, you're right.
But the tactic is still the same. So, in the case of somebody like Patty Hearst, she got kidnapped by rebels and they put her into isolation. They blindfolded her. They started indoctrinating her with their beliefs. How is that different from people who go to Nithyananda's programs? In our case, we're promised enlightenment. We're promised Vedic mind, yogic body, which means the thinking capacity of the ancient Veda scriptures and the body of a perfect, healthy yogi. And we're promised that it's the lifestyle of the ultimate compassion. We're told that there are 5 principles we'll be living by, which is nonviolence, non-stealing, truthfulness. We're given so many great ideals that we're in for. Once we get there, it's a bait and switch. We find out that instead of nonviolence, they have a skewed definition of violence, and that if somebody is being yelled at or sleep deprived or malnourished, but it's for the sake of breaking their patterns, that's the biggest thing that we're told we have to do is break your patterns, then it's no longer considered a torture. So the brainwashing is the same. Sleep deprivation tactic is used, isolation is used, information control where we can only see the information the cult wants us to see, that's used. We're brainwashed. But it's easy for people to put that aside when they say, well, you went there willingly, you paid for the program. In my case, I spent $20,000 on programs for that cult, maybe more like 30, because I also did the Poojas and the Homas. And so, I paid for it, but I thought it was going to be one thing, and then I got brainwashed into something else.
Yeah. Boy, I'll tell you something. You talk about similarity here. We got it. And they're called different things, but between this and Scientology, there's very, very close techniques and tactics they use to get you to believe it. And I'm getting a signal here from my... Okay, wrong signal. There you go. Listen, I do want to get into one thing before we close down this, because I think the points you made, we could end the program right now and people would see it, but I just don't want to do that. So let's do this extra little bit if that's okay with you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Now, one of the things about Scientology is that there is a select group at the top that lives better, dresses better, gets more money than the others. Is there something similar like that in Nithyananda?
Yes, for sure. So he greatly favors people who are famous or wealthy. So for these December programs, these $15,000 programs, you'd think that because everyone pays 15 grand, all the participants are treated as equals, but that's not the case. There's a segregated eating area for the Sarvagnapita and Kata people, so the 200,000 or $1 million donors. And anybody in the crowd who is famous, like a movie star, a singer-songwriter, a producer, somebody who's like a social influencer, they get the invite to sit with that special group of people. And then a high-pressure sales tactic is used on them to try to get them to donate and become a part of that special group of people. And that group eats a better quality of food than everybody else. And when people from that group become Adinavasis or sannyasis, for the first little while, it doesn't really last once their mind has been broken. But while they're first adjusting to the lifestyle in the Adinam, they're given something like a star treatment. So I know, for example, in Scientology, there's the celebrity center.
Right.
Similarly, in Nithyananda's cult, people who are considered of that caliber will have access to an extension area near to Nithyananda's personal residence, and they eat special food in that area. So while everyone else is eating like white rice and sambar, which is like a runny vegetable soup, and you're lucky if there's vegetables in it, the people who are considered his circle of people. They get to eat delicacies like idlis and dosas, which have a bit more protein. They're like Indian flatbreads, and they get better food.
Yeah.
While everyone else sleeps in a 1,000-bed dorm, these people get private rooms. And I mean, when I left, I first tried to leave the organization even before the kids told me about getting beaten and getting, um, tortured into faking the powers. Before that, like in February of last year, I saw Leah Remini's series on A&E, that Scientology in the Aftermath, and I started, like, I was feeling cold chills by the similarities, and that's when I first realized,
Yeah.
like, holy shit, I'm in a cult.
Yeah.
So I sent Nithyananda a message through his secretary Ranjita and said, I'm dropping the coffee, I'm not coming back, I'm done. So the way that they lured me back was he sent me a message saying, I know that the lifestyle in the Audinum is not ideal. We're fixing it, we're changing it. How can the system ever change if you stay there? I need people like you who can come in and make the necessary improvements. And so, I mean, somebody had commented on our first interview saying it's pretty naive to think that you can go into a cult and change it because it's a top-down authoritarian regime. Well, I had the leader literally tell me, come in and make the changes you want to make.
Yeah, but your mind is still in that of a cult.
Yeah,
You had the realization you're in a cult. That doesn't change that maybe you were still in abeyance to this guy, though. You know what I mean?
absolutely. I thought the organization is being run like a cult, and that's really sad because it's taking away from the legitimacy of Nithyananda's teachings. I was still brainwashed
Yeah.
enough to think he's an avatar. So when he told me, come back, he promised me one of the VIP rooms where the Sarvagnapita Yajamans stay,
Yeah.
like the $200,000 donors. He told me that he would give me the freedom to structure my day how I want, replan my social media team. He took away the mandatory 3 videos a day for everyone and said, you come in and structure it how you feel it's right. And so I kind of went back thinking, okay, this is great. Like, I'm going to fix this place
Yeah.
and make it proper, which just definitely didn't happen. 2 days into my coming back, and the ashram was being more cultic than it had ever been before. And it's so strange to be in a place like that. I'm guessing, Ron, it's kind of probably a lot like how you felt when you and your wife were planning the escape from Scientology, where you're there and everyone around you is brainwashed and obedient to the rules and the structure, but you see through it.
Yeah.
It's a
And
very strange realization, a very strange place to be.
you're a person by yourself at that point because
Exactly.
you don't know if you can trust anybody to talk truth
No.
to. So you've got to keep your mouth shut
Yeah.
and keep focused on what you want to do. And in my case, it was to escape. And on March 25th of 2012, that's when Becky and I
Wow.
just drove out the gate, and we've never looked back since. And I gotta end up with a little message for everybody, though, and I'll tell you what it is. And listen careful to me because I think this is worth knowing, and I think you might agree with me, Sarah. Don't ever assign to your freedom another person.
Yes.
Don't ever assign the power of another person to have over you to be able to tell you that you're going to have your eternity in bliss or you're going to go to heaven.
Yeah.
You are the only one who's going to determine anything, if there is anything like that, for you. It's never going to be Nithyananda. It was never L. Ron Hubbard who holds the keys to all these things, because that's a story that you bought. And once you bought it, then you did assign that power to them. And that was your primary error. Assign the power to these things to yourself.
Yes.
And I'll tell you, I think you're going to do a lot better.
Oh, yeah.
Do your own research, do your own thinking, and make up your own mind. Don't seek somebody else's. Well, what do you think of this? Hey, fuck that. Make
Yeah.
up your own mind. And Sarah,
Absolutely.
what do you
And
think?
can I say one more thing, Ron? I agree with you 100%.
Go on.
And the biggest irony here is that, like you had asked about the the fair game and how they're attacking me. Nithyananda has literally said in the discourse that if anybody follows me, I will lead them directly to hell and that he'll lead them to heaven. And so his entire Sangha has been given the instruction to block me on social media, don't listen to me, don't watch what I'm putting out there. And they've been convinced I'm trying to start my own cult with all of this. And it's batshit crazy. It's stupid because you're not telling ex-Scientologists that you have the answers to life and everything and they should follow you. And the same way, I'm not telling Nithyananda disciples, leave Nithyananda and follow me. What we're saying is start asking questions. When there's a discrepancy between the organization's teachings and practices, when people are segregated against and treated differently and treated badly and tortured, when people leave the cult and suddenly they're shunned by their community, so it's breaking up families and separating friends, when everybody's life who goes into one of these organizations claiming to make them better, when in fact their lives get made much, much worse, start asking, is this really what I want for myself? You know, is this teacher really who he claims to be when all of his ex-followers are suppressive persons? Why didn't he fix them? You
Well,
know, if an ex-Scientologist is a suppressive person, why didn't the years and dollars they invested in Scientology, why didn't it work?
yep,
That's what they should be asking themselves.
well,
For people like me, who was a sannyasi in the Nithyananda cult, why did my close proximity to Nithyananda not work? Why are they now saying that I was an infiltrating agent trying to destroy Hinduism? And it's people need to look exactly as you said. The only one who can give you enlightenment is yourself.
you're right. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to end the program with that statement because that's that's the statement that I want people to hear.
Thank you
And
so much.
yeah, and I want to thank you for coming on the show. And I just want to say, there's one thing I would like everybody to do, and that is see if you can get somebody else to subscribe or share this because this is valuable information. And then, if you'd like, and you have obviously a free choice in this, become a patron. So for myself and Sarah, it was a delight having you on. I got to tell you, and very
Pleasure.
informative
Thank
and
you.
very valuable information. So for Sarah and myself, I'm Ron Miscavige. This is Life After Scientology. I will see you on the next episode. Bye bye now.